Don't get me wrong, he still sucks. Wish is less a movie and more an algorithmically constructed product. I almost hesitate to call it a film, not because I think it's too awful to deserve the title or anything, I'd call Manos a film, but because it is so artificial, it feels more like the synthetic alternative to what a film is. The fact that it was widely accused of being written by AI is indicative of how plastic the end product feels. There is so much I can get into when it comes to the problems with this movie. The movie says it takes place on a Mediterranean island, but if that's so, then why does it look like this? I mean, I know why, but why? Also, if Asha loves Rosas and its people, why does she live in this tiny little hamlet completely outside the city? They say they didn't want to use the initial concept of Starboy because they didn't want to just do the genie again. And yet every single time they ran into a story or art problem, they openly admit to going back to the Disney vault.
Or just something, because we sort of linger on him, you know. But I mean, he's thrilled, even though he's, you know, sort of make a pose.
Rafiki.
Oh my gosh, yes please!
Knowing what we know now.
So why did they cut the shape-shifting Starboy? They said that they took big inspiration from Frozen's Let It Go by first writing the song, This Wish, and structuring the movie around that. But if you wanted to do it this way, why did you hire pop music writers instead of musical theatre writers, which is what Disney has been doing since, well, I was going to say the 90s, but honestly since the Sherman Brothers. I could probably spend an entire hour just trying to figure out what the hell the filmmakers are talking about when they say the flattened backgrounds of old Disney films don't have any depth of field, when they have the original multiplane camera in the lobby, while simultaneously showing the depth of field in the older Disney movies. And they're like crowded around this flat sheet of paper going, wow, an illustration doesn't have any depth of field. We should do that.
We had lots of discussions about depth of field. And depth of field being, you know, when you focus on something really close, everything else goes out of focus, which is a very kind of more live action type feel. But we had this illustrative look, so we wanted everything to be in focus like you would with the illustration.
It's one of the weirdest things I've seen the making of feature try and gaslight its audience about.
Editing CPAP here. I've already written the script, I've recorded all the audio, and I just found this article from the 5th of December last year, 2023. And, uh-oh. Oh no. Oh dear, 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 dear. Uh-oh. On Wish, we used neural style transfer, a machine learning tool developed by Disney Research, allowing us to provide a style image and it would imprint that design onto Pyral simulations. Oh no! Uh-oh! Oops!
Even if it's being done in CG, the CG people had to handcraft when to munge and when not to.
You bastards! You vicious, heartless bastards!
You know, what would Walt be doing if he had this kind of technology?
Yeah, to go backwards in order to go forwards.
Look what you've done to him! He's worked his fingers to the bone to make this place what it is!
Mickey Mouse has a heart-shaped face mask, and I've always thought of Star a little bit like Walt Disney in a way.
This fine, honorable man whose boots you are not worthy to kiss! Oh, it makes me mad.
The density of things that are catastrophically wrong in this film is something that you can peel back, and every time you think you've followed one thread to its end point, you find a completely new one to tear your hair out over. But today, I want to focus on Magnifico. I've watched a handful of videos on YouTube covering Wish from various perspectives, Whether it was discussing why the music doesn't work, or why the references don't work, or why the plot doesn't work, or just plain tearing into the utter failure that is current era Disney. But I noticed a weird pattern that seemed to be popping up in these videos.
Why is he collecting everyone's wishes? Did they give him powers or something? Well, eventually he learns that they can, but no, he doesn't know that right away. So why do that? Because that works.
I definitely got some enjoyment out of this character, but like, not nearly enough for him to stand alongside the likes of Ursula, Scar, and Jafar, you know? And I think that's because they didn't really commit to a solid motivation for his character.
This is surprising to me, because as campy as Disney's villains can be, a lot of them have reasons to be the way that they are. Magnifico is just evil. I don't know why.
I decide. Why didn't they show how some of the wishes might actually be dangerous, or how granting everyone's wishes have done horrible things in the past? Instead of him just vaguely saying, oh, it might happen. What exactly are his motivations? Just to continue to stay in power? That's kind of lame. He's lame.
This was surprising to me because this was not my takeaway from the film when I watched it for the first time. Unlike every other character, Magnifico is the only one who has anything resembling a character arc. Although, this is not exactly hard when every other character in the movie has the substance of a rice cracker. And in order to explain why Magnifico's mid-writing is the best in the film, we need to talk about the character that's supposed to carry the story first. I heard another YouTuber describe Wish as not so much a movie as an aftermath, and I think this description is perfect for its lead character. Asha is an amalgamation of broken pieces from other Disney movies as well as earlier versions of the script. This is a massive problem because her and Magnifico are the only two characters in the entire movie this narrative can hang itself on. Star doesn't speak and is too simplistic a design to communicate in other ways. Asha's friends are a reference to the 7 dwarves, meaning there are 7 of them, and not a single one gets enough screen time to show anything beyond their one and only personality trait. Valentino, who I hate with a fiery passion, only exists to make the DreamWorks face, and the Queen, who was originally going to be evil, was reduced to the role of doting motherly wife. Good job, Disney. Until she decides to stab her beloved husband in the back and then take over as queen. And this was somehow not a plot to take control of the kingdom, and we're just supposed to accept that replacing the old monarch with the new monarch is some kind of positive change.
The Queen is dead! Long live the Queen!
So all we have is Magnifico, the villain, and Asha. Asha is supposedly yet another dorky, relatable, awkward girl, but she isn't. She has a handful of designated scenes where she does something aggressively quirky, and then when those scenes are done, she either defaults to Zoomer slang or generic Disney princess. The only way the creators managed to describe her outside of generic buzzwords is activist. And I don't know how to tell Hollywood filmmakers that live in Los Angeles that activist is not a personality.
Hyper-conservative, bigotry, vitriol, prejudice, hatred.
This has resulted in one of the movie's biggest plot holes, which is that Asha doesn't have a wish or aspiration of her own outside of wanting something more for us than this, which is the song meant to represent the entire story. Asha starts the movie indoctrinating tourists as to why Rosas is amazing and why they should totally move there. So to have her sing how she wants more for the people of Rosas after learning not everyone gets their wish granted comes across as weird and confusing. Maybe there would be more weight to this if they showed the citizens of Rosas slaving away because the promise of maybe getting their wish granted is helping them power through it or something. But, they're fine. The only character in the whole movie apparently suffering ill effects from his wish being taken away is Simon. And if he is the only person reacting negatively like this, I'm more willing to believe he has an iron deficiency. That is because this part of the story is from an older version of the script, where Asha and her family lived in a village hidden in the forest far away from Magnifico in an attempt to keep him from taking their wishes by force, which was built around the song This Wish, since the song was written before the script. So this song makes sense in that story, not in the story we got, leaving Asha with confused, unclear motivations as to what the bigger problem is. and instead comes across as she simply disagrees with Magnifico's lying by omission, and this one singular fact has made her character have a complete 180, going from selling rosas to tourists to wishing rosas wasn't in the state it currently is. The problem is not the idea, but the communication of it to the audience. These remnants of the previous story also bleed into the finished film, where Asha is shown to not really care about anyone else's wishes aside from her family's. Very early on, the character who is meant to be grumpy points out that being the apprentice to Magnifico will automatically get your wish granted, confirming that the reason Asha is applying for the job is to get her grandfather's wish granted via nepotism. So that's cool. She also straight up asks Magnifico to grant her grandfather's wish within 5 minutes of meeting him, which he even calls her out on.
Most people wait a few months, even a year, before they start asking me for things.
I'm so sorry.
In a version of the story where Asha's focus on her family like this is a result of them being persecuted, this would feel noble. But within the plot of this story, it just makes her look self-centered. The writers must have realized this because they have to have her tell Star,
I wished for more for us, for my family, and for... Oh, no. Not in like a selfish way.
And when she decides to steal the wishes back...
You're here to steal from the king.
It's not stealing.
Here's a tip. If you have to have your main character all but look at the audience and say, don't worry, I'm a good person, then you have not written a character whose actions can be read as that of a good person. However, the writers did not have a strong idea of what her character is supposed to be now that they've taken away both her original backstory as well as Starboy. So this behavior can't even be used to accuse her of being unlikable because none of this feels organic. It's just shrapnel left over from what Disney got rid of. The fact that Asha becomes the fairy godmother at the end is also just a very weird choice that completely breaks the narrative of the film. Asha says it's wrong for Magnifico to decide whose wish gets granted, and that people should be allowed to pursue their ungranted wishes themselves. Magnifico counters this point directly by saying people give him the wishes they know they will never be able to achieve on their own. Regardless, Asha wants the wishes freed, only for the movie to end with Asha being given the power to decide whose wishes get granted, and proclaims that the point of the story is that you should not stop making wishes?
Okay.
It's a bizarre decision that seems like it would be a last-minute addition to the script for the sake of a reference if it wasn't for the fact that Asha becoming the fairy godmother was there from the concept stage because they incorporated pumpkin seeds into her dress. The making of also completely contradicts the movie itself, as the filmmakers seem to think the focus is on pursuing your own wishes rather than have them granted for you, despite Magnifico directly saying the wishes given to him are the ones unable to be granted by the person themselves. All the while talking about how Asha becoming the fairy godmother was a plan for the story very early on. It's not that you can't do these two things at the same time, but the way the story is written, it just seems very confused as to what its core concept is. Asking Magnifico to grant your wishes all by himself is bad because Magnifico shouldn't have that much power. But also, you should wish upon stars to guide you. But also, we're all stars who can grant our own wishes. But also, Asha is the fairy godmother who will grant your wishes with magic. Meanwhile, the characters the filmmakers are describing in the making of isn't Asha, it's Tiana. It's so bad that the making of will cut between someone describing something and a scene in the movie to illustrate what they mean. And you can almost hear the editor crying as they try to make the two things correlate to each other.
If you were to take that first step closer to your dream, even if you may or may not achieve that goal, your life get more fulfilled.
So that's our main character. An 8th generation VHS copy of what a Disney princess stereotype is, as well as residual damage from cut storylines. And with every other character in this thing being a glorified background prop, that leaves us with only Magnifico to focus on. Magnifico was marketed as a return to the classic Disney villain. Disney movies have since their very inception had overdramatic pure evildoers leaning fully into and embracing camp. Originally taking inspirations from contemporary vamp actresses and later on, thanks to the Hays Code and just general social atmosphere, deliberate appeal to the all-American blue-collar worker by making the villains foppish and aristocratic. However, it wasn't until 1989's The Little Mermaid and Ursula that Disney villains have been showstoppers, by turning the deliberate gay camp all the way up to 11 and given their own musical numbers, culminating in what I think most people agree is one of Disney's most frighteningly realistic foppish upper-class villains.
A lesson needs to be learned.
You shithead! You piece of shit!
We then went through the rocky post-Renaissance experimental period, all while Pixar was pulling the twist villain card repeatedly, until Frozen popularized the twist villain, and then Disney and Pixar both did the twist villain like 500 more times until everybody got bored of it. Because the twist villain only works the first time you watch a movie and robs the story of an entertaining and engaging bad guy. And so, Magnifico was supposed to be an answer to that demand. I found exactly one interview with the voice actress for Queen Amaya, saying Wish was originally going to have the evil queen be the one in charge and Magnifico be the good guy, but I couldn't find any other information to corroborate this. Of course, trying to find straightforward information was difficult when it very quickly became clear the filmmakers were just straight up lying in several interviews, sometimes in the same interview. But even if Magnifico was not meant to be good at first, they did want to make him and the Queen an evil couple, something Disney had never done before. Until Disney changed their mind and instead made Magnifico be the evil one and the Queen be the quiet, loving, doting wife. Presumably because Disney didn't want to make a woman the bad guy because they're so obsessed with optics at the moment. This sounds like me complaining about woke content, but no. This is me complaining about the way Disney exploits women, ethnicities, and people with disabilities to make their company look good.
If I had to say which was telling the truth about society, a speech by a Minister of Housing or the actual buildings put up in his time, I should believe the buildings.
My favorite part is in the making of, where they have the disabled Irish gay story artist sit at a table with the two heads of story and silently nod as they talk about how great the movie is, while making damn sure the camera gets a shot of both his pride pins and his crutch, which has been placed unnaturally against the table.
What did you think and feel when you saw Dahlia animated?
Magnifico was eventually put into the role of the main villain. And while we're on the early drafts of this movie, in one version of the story, Magnifico would start the movie devouring wishes for the power they provided him, and by the end, the corruption of the evil book causes him to mutate into a hulking evil monstrosity as Queen Amaya gives out the commands. But this version of the story made the director Fawn Vera Sunthorn's 7-year-old cry. And because Disney doesn't believe in preparing children for the horrors of the real world through safe exposure through fiction anymore, they yeeted this part of the ending and just had people sing at Magnifico to defeat him. It's literally a K-Base movie ending. So we start off with a villain in a similar situation as Asha, a pale imitation of previous Disney films and leftover residue from earlier scripts. But unlike Asha, Magnifico actually has a character. The movie starts off with an annoying reference to Snow White and Pinocchio. The book introduces Magnifico who, as a young man, believed that a person's wish was the most important thing in the world, but knew it was hard, if not impossible, to achieve, and so he learned magic to become a powerful sorcerer. The book then says, and I quote,
"Able to protect from harm or ill will any wish given to him, and for the good and the worthy, even grant that wish."
Totally not concerning words of only good and worthy people getting their wishes granted, which doesn't help the cult recruitment vibe Rosas has going for it. The interesting part, though, is that the book makes it sound like the goal for Magnifico was the safekeeping of wishes, and that granting them was secondary. Not that this was some grand plan to amass power and control over people as the sorcerer king of an island. The book states Magnifico didn't even know if people would want his magic and help, but that they came to live here anyway, making it clear that the growing of Rosas came from people making their own choice to move to it, rather than Magnifico actively insisting on his own importance towards an already existing group of people. Asha goes on to say, after the book fades out, that no matter where people came from, they were welcome, and that people came to the island from far and wide looking to get their wishes granted and for the king's protection. Why would families come to Rosas to give their wishes to Magnifico for safekeeping and in gratitude for Magnifico's protection? It's never explained, but it sets up the suggestion that beyond the island of Rosas, there is something that people need protection from, emphasized by showing Magnifico suffering some other event that taught him wishes are difficult to fulfill. The making of has this incredibly weird mindset where the filmmakers seem to not understand how fairy tales work and make a point of nailing down not only the location of earlier Disney movies, but also the exact time period they supposedly take place in. You know, I always saw Cinderella as taking place in fairy tale version of France, not specifically France in the 1800s like these filmmakers seem to think is extremely important. I'm guessing they took all that historically accurate Disney character fan art way too seriously. So according to them, this movie takes place near the Iberian Peninsula in the 1250s, because they made this whole thing about this movie taking place earlier than any other Disney movie. I guess they forgot about Brother Bear existing despite it being in the credits. So I guess this takes place during the struggle for control of the Strait of Gibraltar. I don't know. If we ignore the filmmakers waffling on about hyper-specific time periods and focus purely on the movie and its content, there is a definite suggestion that there is trouble beyond the shores of Rosas, and Magnifico offers protection from it. And you might want to argue about this and say that the only reason people come to Rosas is because they want their wishes granted, and that I'm reading far too much into the setting of the story and why any of these characters are here. But if the only reason people come to Rosas is because they want their wishes granted and nothing else, that kind of makes things worse. Because then you have a situation where people come to Rosas for no other reason than they want a man with powers to grant their wishes, and then get all petulant and pissy when the guy they demanded grant their wishes doesn't do it the way that they want him to. So sure, you could say the only reason in the movie people come to live here is to have their wishes granted, but...
Okay, but that's worse. I mean, you do get how that's worse, right?
Fast forward to Magnifico interviewing Asha to be his apprentice. He gives her a far more detailed version of his backstory. After hearing Asha talk about losing her father at the age of 12, Magnifico tells her that he lost both his family as well as the land to, quote, vicious, greedy thieves.
Our lands were destroyed by selfish, greedy thieves.
He goes on to explain that he founded the Kingdom of Rosas specifically and with the intent of making a place where everyone is safe, reiterating what I said about the passage of the opening book, that the goal of Rosas was not power, but protection. He then tells Asha emphatically that nobody should ever have to see their dreams destroyed right in front of them. I would play the clip, but too many clips in a row makes the copyright system angry. After hearing Asha agree with him regarding loss and preventing loss, Magnifico takes her to view the wishes. So, right here in this scene, this gives us everything to explain Magnifico's motivation and driving force for the rest of the movie. Magnifico was very young when the land where he lived was destroyed. The only description he gives of who caused this is wicked, greedy thieves. This, I'm pretty sure, is where most people fell off regarding Magnifico's motivations. CinemaSins, for as little as you should regard that channel as any kind of worthwhile insight, pointed out that the backstory description here is too vague for us to feel the extremes Magnifico goes to afterwards make sense. And believe it or not, I'm not here to argue against that. Magnifico may be the best written character in the movie, but that doesn't mean he's written well. CinemaSins added that if we actually saw anything of this backstory, we might care more about Magnifico's point of view and understand him better, and I must agree. But that doesn't mean there's nothing here, unlike the rest of the characters. With the simple explanation of lands getting ravaged by people seeking to pillage it of his wealth, as well as the added details that Magnifico's family was killed during this event, the visuals in the book of Magnifico leaving a wrecked ship, and the strong visual communication of this tapestry, torn and burnt exactly over the embroidery of his family, and yet still cherished enough for Magnifico to make it the centerpiece of his laboratory, we have enough pieces to understand the basics. Maybe it's just because of the kind of films I've watched before, but the first comparison that came to mind was the pillaging by the Norsemen in The Secret of Kells, depicting the very real historic raiding of Ireland by the Vikings. The other thing that came to mind was the war machine from The Thief and the Cobbler, an immense nightmarish construction which threatens to pillage and destroy the Golden City. But I also understand that me having seen other animated films actually show pillaging is not something I should give this movie credit for, because Disney's Wish didn't actually do anything.
No wall can stop the Northmen, Abbott. When they come, all we can do is run and hope that we are fast enough.
Nevertheless, this is Magnifico's backstory, and vague or not, it is stated more than once to be the sole reason Magnifico started to learn magic, to prevent anyone else from having to experience loss and destruction like this. So, I want you to stop and think for a minute what this says about his mindset. He experiences an extremely traumatic event where his home and his family are burnt to the ground directly because of other people. He makes it his entire life's mission to try and do something to prevent such a horrible thing ever happening again. He laments that if only he had known magic back then, he might have been able to do something. And so, from that day forward, right until the events of this movie, he has studied magic. To boil it down further to its bare basics, something devastating happened to him, and for the rest of his life, he obsessed over something that could make him feel like he has some kind of control to stop that kind of event from happening again. There's a word for that. Magnifico is a deeply traumatized character. Within the present of the movie, Magnifico is still strongly and insistently following his pattern of exerting control with his magic over other people's wishes just so he can personally keep them safe. Because if he is magically powerful, it means he is now the only person that can keep people safe. So he can't leave this up to anyone else because that runs the risk of something bad happening again. In reality, Magnifico promises to keep people's wishes safe in exchange for the possibility of having your wish granted, and people flocking from far and wide to hand their wishes over is just a horrible cycle of feeding into and enabling a maladaptive coping mechanism. This is a horrible situation. Taking the wishes into safekeeping has not lessened that fear that caused Magnifico to learn magic in the first place, because now Magnifico worries that the wishes themselves could be the cause of destruction and loss. So not only does he have to protect them, but he has to make sure any wishes that could cause horrible things happening are taken away from the person to stop them possibly following through with it. It's a paranoid spiral which the people of Rosas are unknowingly feeding into. Honestly, out of every person in this kingdom, the one who should have realized a long time ago that this whole thing is just a bad setup that's going to lead to tears is Queen Amaya, who loves him and has been by his side as they built Rosas together. But because she started out as his partner in crime before getting demoted to maternal doting wife, she has not been written as a real character, just the residue of a character who used to exist and now doesn't anymore. And so Magnifico is locked in this destructive spiral. This leads to the second problem which almost everyone picked up on right away with this movie. Although I have just described his policing of the wishes as paranoia, Magnifico kind of has a point.
Too vague. Create what? A rebellious mob, perhaps? To inspire them to do what? Destroy Rosas, maybe?
Literally every video I have watched of people discussing this movie, even if they hate Magnifico, agree that he has a completely valid point here. He's not even accusing Asha Saba of doing something bad. He is merely saying that the wish is too vague and the outcome too unpredictable. He worries that something bad could come from it as a result through no fault of Saba's. The wish gone bad thing is such a concrete trope in fiction that it's not even a trope. It's almost an expected outcome when wishes are involved. The byline for this movie's poster is, "Be careful what you wish for." Magnifico not wanting to grant a wish because it's potentially dangerous is completely reasonable, even if he wasn't acting out of paranoia. Interestingly enough, despite being able to see everyone's wish and deciding which ones he personally feels are dangerous, Magnifico doesn't go out and arrest people for committing thought crime. He even states to Asha that the wishes that don't get granted are still kept safe and protected, just like those that will be granted. Of course, this is a fail-safe to prevent people from pursuing those dangerous wishes themselves, which is a dick move. But the movie couldn't even commit to making Magnifico go full fascist, which is a bad thing because now you've written a villain who the audience agrees with.
So the king's like, well, that's too vague. What if he wants to inspire people to destroy the kingdom? We can't have that. Kinda has a good point. No, he's the bad guy. Oh.
Initially, he claims that he doesn't grant people's wishes because they might be dangerous and threaten peace in Rosas. So you can kinda see where he's coming from, but also you can tell he's kinda bullshitting and he just wants to keep his power.
I hate to side with the cult leader, but doesn't King Magnifico have a good point? A vague wish could be disastrous. And what if everyone wishes for the same thing and we end up with a Bruce Almighty apocalypse? Or Season 7, Episode 21 of The X-Files.
And the man is like, whoa, girl, I can't just grant wishes without prejudice, you know? There's a whole filtering process we have to go through first to make sure the wishes don't cause any dangerous consequences. You understand, right? So Asha is absolutely distraught.
How can we as an audience not feel empathy for him as he carefully selects who he's willing to empower with his magic?
Of course, Asha can't have a counter-argument to this because Magnifico has a perfectly valid point. So the only thing the writers can give her to be upset about is that most of these wishes will never be granted.
And they already figured that out mathematically. He only does like 12 a year.
Hell, she even agrees with Magnifico, saying that the people with bad and dangerous wishes can just be stopped. Magnifico argues,
"You've completely missed the point. People come here because they know they can't make their own dreams come true."
And Asha's counter-argument is,
"It's not fair. My Saba is good. The people of Rosas are good."
Oh, so she doesn't actually have a decent rebuttal. She just doesn't think there's a possibility for good intentions to lead to bad outcomes.
Well, you're young. You don't know anything, really.
Anyway, fast way forward where Asha wishes on a star and this causes the $80 Disneyland plush to fall out of the sky and cause unfunny comedy to happen. Star also causes, this, which I don't know exactly what this is, but I do really like the way Magnifico reacts to it. This is the body language of a man in terror. Queen Amaya comes in, believing that whatever the pretty light show was Magnifico's doing, but he immediately denies it. Whatever happened, all he knows is it affected the wishes he's holding, and his immediate conclusion is that the unspecified magic, which did something unclear and poorly defined, was a warning aimed at him specifically. After all, he is the only person who can wield magic on this island as well as its king. It's a scene that once again drags up his paranoia and fear, which, as established by literally every scene he's been in so far, is rooted in what happened to him. You could argue he's completely right here, as Star coming down to help Asha liberate people's wishes is a threat directly aimed at him, but I'm not here to argue that Magnifico is secretly the good guy in this movie, because he isn't. I want to make that clear. Magnifico is a deeply traumatized person who has never healed from what happened to him, mostly because I don't think he's ever had anyone in his life to make him realize what he needs rather than what he thinks he needs. Because nobody in this kingdom actually cares about him. They only care that he grants people's wishes and that he's hot. The only person close to him is his wife, and as we see later, she stabs him in the back at the first opportunity to do so. The point is, Magnifico made choices and decisions to get where he is in the movie. And up until now, as far as he and all the other characters are concerned, he has made the right choices. Until this point in the movie, where Magnifico gets more and more obsessive trying to track down the other magic user, who he sees as a threat. And those choices that he makes, threatening that whoever helps the rival will never get their wish granted, bursting out in anger towards the people of Rosas, and blackmailing people to turn Asha over to him, are all choices he makes himself. I was going to write how an animated Disney movie is not going to want to dig deep enough into a villain character to explore how it is the decisions you make that mark you as a bad person, especially when you are given options, but instead take the choice that harms people, until I remembered that Disney did actually have at least a small handful of villains written in a way where they're not simply evil coded, but are who they are because of their choices. The best example is Frollo during the song Hellfire, where he begs God to deliver him from Esmeralda and stop him from lusting after her. One of his guards interrupts him to let him know that Esmeralda has escaped and disappeared. Frollo is given the choice right here and now to let her go. His prayer has been answered. Esmeralda is gone, removed from his life so he may no longer be tempted by her. And instead, Frollo makes the choice to send his guards looking for her, just so he can give her the ultimatum between him and getting burnt at the stake. Frollo is an evil man throughout the entire film because of his choices and actions. but he believes himself to be in the right because he considers himself a virtuous man.
There's a problem in me, but I'm not the problem. The problem is this woman. The problem is everything outside of me.
Alternatively, Long John Silver is an antagonist who is a pirate and has spent his life learning how to survive as a pirate, learning how not to show weakness so as to prevent himself from becoming a target, and has experienced violence in the face of going after what he craves the most.
You give up a few things, chasing a dream.
But why Long John Silver is a sympathetic character is because when Silver is faced with important choices in the movie, like letting his lifetime obsession go, he makes the conscious decision to save Jim instead. Or when he decides not to shoot Jim when he makes his escape, and even giving Jim a handful of jewels to make up for the destruction of his mother's inn. Long John Silver makes choices that paint him as a flawed but good person in the eyes of the audience. Probably even more so as we have to see him fight against his own learned behavior. It makes him more sympathetic than if he had just been a good person the entire film. Because we, the audience, recognize that these choices are incredibly difficult for him to make. But even so, he does his best to make the right ones. Magnifico makes decisions and choices that harms people. I want it to be clear that although I am defending him, and I fully mean it that he's the best character in the movie, that doesn't mean I think he's secretly the good guy and Asha is the villain. Because that's simply not true. Two sides of a conflict can both be wrong at the same time. Unfortunately, the movie has done a horrible job of writing every single character in the film, and Magnifico is the only one who seems to have something more going for him than being a stock personality, which makes him the most engaging person in the film. And giving him this tragic backstory leaves us, the audience, confused how we're supposed to feel about him. Unless you watch the film with a preconceived bias, or are one of those people that swallow the narrative directly as it's fed to you without mentally engaging with it whatsoever. Magnifico is a monarch, so of course he's evil. Asha is the main character, so of course she's the good guy. Magnifico is a straw man for insert corrupted figure of power here, so of course he's evil. All things the movie itself makes no effort to actually have part of its story and just rests on its laurels as a Disney movie, so the audience already knows the way we're supposed to digest the product. And yet, for some reason, even though we already have Magnifico's backstory established, as vague as it is, and should now be focusing on how his actions are what make him evil, the movie decides instead to reaffirm the parts of Magnifico's character that make him sympathetic.
Everything I do is to make sure that never happens again.
Rather than a character fueled by lust or power or vanity or envy or any self-serving greed to take from innocent people just because they want it or think they deserve it, Disney has written an antagonist who is traumatized and still hurting, and then told us he's evil for it. The movie further makes things confusing by showing Magnifico considering the Book of Forbidden Magic after he'd gone through everything else in his library trying to identify what the light was.
You yourself say forbidden magic is not the way.
A king must be prepared to do anything to protect his kingdom.
The Queen manages to talk down his growing desperation and redirects him to asking for help from his people, rather than turning to something that could harm him in what may be the only real act of emotional support you ever see Magnifico get. And then, for some bizarre reason, Disney thought it would be a good idea to show Magnifico actively make the choice, when given help by someone to calm down, to not use evil magic. He makes the choice, when helped to ground himself, to look for an alternative solution. He is given a choice and makes the better decision. Almost as if with love and support, deeply hurt people can rise above their negative patterns and behavior. And this is the bad guy. This is the guy we're supposed to dislike and boo at the end.
Rosas is so lucky to have you, as am I.
So Magnifico goes to address the crowd. Queen Amaya told him he should ask the people of Rosas for help in locating the source of the magic, but the scene itself has Magnifico basically resort to...
This is illegal, you know.
The fact that magic is forbidden from being practiced by anyone but him has never been mentioned as a stipulation of living on this island at any point in this movie before the grumpy character casually mentions it in a scene that happened about 3 minutes before this one. None of this connects to the scene we just saw about the Queen's suggestion to appeal to the people who love him. Instead, Magnifico is dictating at them about the audacity of some amateur to practice illegal magic and being borderline accusatory towards the crowd. But the Queen has had her designated dialogue for this plot point to happen, so she's been turned off until the writers need her again.
They used magic to put you all at risk. But don't worry, they are no match for me.
This would have been it for this scene. A problematic but honest appeal to the people of Rosas that, although he was not the cause of the light as everyone thought, he still intends to protect them and their wishes. However, Asha's friend realizes Asha still needs time to escape the laboratory and instigates the crowd into questioning Magnifico about the wishes to stall for time. This causes the people of Rosas to at first start asking perfectly valid questions regarding their wishes. But before we, the audience, can start seeing Magnifico in a negative light by having him explode in the face of inconvenient questioning, the movie instead has the crowd quickly deteriorate from demanding explanations and instead into demanding a wish ceremony just because they want one, regardless of it really having anything to do with the problem of an unknown magic user.
Is that all you can think about? A wish-granting ceremony?
And so, realizing that the people of Rosas have no interest in him or his efforts to keep the city safe and are only interested in his powers, Magnifico snaps that if all they care about is wish-granting ceremonies, then he will grant whoever helps him find the magic user's wish. But anyone who helps the magic user will never get their wish granted. This is authoritarian, make no mistake. Magnifico has now put into place that lovely McCarthyism of being suspicious of your family and neighbors and to report anyone you might suspect of being a dirty communist. He will repay you for information to locate this undesirable, but anyone found helping them will be punished. This is objectively a bad thing to do. We can all agree on that. Unfortunately, by painting the people as these self-centered vultures who have no interest in anything Magnifico has to say except to squawk at him for wishes as he is actively asking their help to find a potential danger, the movie has almost justified Magnifico deciding that if nobody is going to listen to him and instead demand wishes, then he is going to speak the only language these people seem to understand. Is this totalitarian to do and very fashy? Yes. Are the people of Rosas a screeching mob, always demanding more and more, with no indication they will ever be satisfied and do nothing but take and take and take? Also yes. Does this make what Magnifico does okay? No. Are the people of Rosas being reasonable or helpful in a serious situation? Also no. Congratulations, movie. I don't have anyone to side with in this story. Then Magnifico sings This Is the Thanks I Get, which sucks, but is still not the worst song in the movie because You're a Star exists.
When it comes to the universe, we're all shareholders. Get back to your system! Solar!
Part of me wonders when this song was written because, well, just like the hesitation to grant wishes that might lead to danger, Magnifico kind of has a point here. You people were the ones who came from who knows where asking to live in his kingdom because it's so wonderful, and you were the ones who decided to stay here because the king of this island may grant your wish. And now you're complaining because the place you chose to live, the place you made the decision to come to, isn't giving you even more than it already is. I don't know what to tell you here, guys. It's not like you were born here and have no choice but to be ruled by Magnifico like an earlier version of the script said. You moved here and it was just as good as advertised, but that's not good enough because you want even more.
I give and give and give and give. You'd think they'd all be content.
I really would love to know when this song was written and if there was any truth to Amaya's voice actress's statement that Magnifico started off in the story as a good guy. Because it would at least explain why this supposed big villain song raises valid complaints, and it wouldn't be the only song in the movie that got retooled as they kept changing the plot. In interviews, the songwriter had this to say about the song at all costs.
How cool would it be if we wrote a song that if you listen to on its own, it sounds like a love song? It could be something you could play at your wedding, or be a lullaby to your kids, just something really beautiful. But when you watch the film, it's the heroine and it's the villain. She continues, you realize they're coming about this both from various points, one from a very selfless standpoint and one from a selfish standpoint.
This is a blatant, straight-faced lie, which didn't even work because literally everyone who heard At All Costs immediately pegged it as being a love song.
That's a love song. Oh yeah, I might have accidentally written this as a love song. Whoops, whoopsie.
Turns out that was because it's a love song. It was meant to be a duet between Asha and Starboy. All they did was change the line, and I'll love you as one does, to and I promise as one does, and changed literally nothing else. And then proceeded to lie in interviews that the song was always written for Magnifico.
Yes.
I kept on telling them in the room, I was like, this is like a wedding song.
I
This
know.
is like...
I genuinely can't understand why the faces at Disney think they can just say things like this when there is easily accessible evidence that proves they're just straight up lying. Why even lie about it? What's the point? Are they stupid? This story is the movie equivalent of World War I scars. It's a landscape pockmarked by damage from forgotten plots. And so I have no idea if This Is the Thanks I Get was rewritten or retooled along with his character at any point to explain why the end product is like this, because the filmmakers are untrustworthy. Anyway, then Magnifico opens the Book of Forbidden Magic, which is exactly the point Magnifico's character, and by extent the entire movie, breaks. We all knew Magnifico was going to open the evil book eventually because the vast majority of us know what a movie is. But within the narrative of the film, Magnifico considers using the book, but is talked down by his loving wife. He tells the people of Rosas to report anyone suspicious to him, and if anyone helps the traitor, they will never get their wish granted, and then immediately afterwards opens the evil book, supposedly out of desperation. I feel like there's a scene missing here, where a guard or something tells Magnifico that nobody has seen or heard anything about a traitor, and that's what leads him to use the book. I know we all know he's gonna use it, filmmakers, but you need to actually put the ingredients for your story in your story. You can't just fast forward to the scenes you want to put in the trailer. If I'm making a cake, I don't skip the part where I stir the doughs just so I can get to the cake eating part. The evil book in this movie makes so little sense to me that I genuinely don't understand the purpose of including it, since, just like his tragic backstory, all this does is reinforce the audience sympathizing with Magnifico. Because now every truly horrible thing we see him do from here on out, we can justify as the book's corruption. Especially because although Magnifico has been shown up until now as very reactionary, kind of a dick, and vain, we have also shown him being loving to his wife, devoted to the protection of Rosas above all else, and taking other people's wishes seriously. Whereas it's only after the book corrupts him does he go full and completely evil. Not to mention, whereas before using the book, Magnifico reaffirms time and time again that his desire is to protect Rosas and its people, the second he uses the book, his only goal and focus is on capturing stars so he can have power, despite already being both the king and most powerful person on the island. There's no endgame here once he becomes evil, which further emphasizes that the book is a corrupting force. Whereas his entire character foundation revolved around the desire to keep Rosas and its people safe, manifesting as controlling behavior, after the use of the book, he seems completely ignorant of the core drive of his entire character up until now, and instead hyper-focuses on capturing Star to power his staff for no reason beyond becoming even more powerful. Which is weird, because in the finale, although Magnifico does yell, "Now nobody can challenge me ever again,"
No one to challenge me ever again.
There is no effort made to tie his corruption to his backstory. You only need to include one line of him going, "I don't need to be scared anymore," or something. But of course, doing this would only reaffirm Magnifico's trauma as a victim, and the movie can't do that because it wants you to ignore everything else that came before this and hate him now. Incidentally, the sequence where he makes the switch to evil is complete nonsense. Magnifico goes to the evil basement. Magnifico shows up at Asha's house. Asha runs away. We cut back to Magnifico in the evil basement. And no, this is not Simon, since he only gets corrupted after this scene. This has nothing to do with Magnifico's character writing, I just wanted to mention it.
Space is warped and time is bendable.
This entire character change is not presented as Magnifico spiraling into villainy. The moment of choosing the book just happens abruptly at the end of his song, and it flips the switch from problematic antagonist into dark magic dream eater. Why do we need the confusing story tale of having an outside force make Magnifico go full sicko mode? And make no mistake, the movie wants you to see Magnifico as irredeemable and evil from this point forward, even going so far as to have the characters all but turn to the audience and say, "Oh, he's fully evil now, we can't do anything to save him."
No one can bring him back from this. Embrace forbidden magic just once, and you commit to it for eternity.
That is the narrative goal of these writers that they repeatedly state in every single interview, that Magnifico is a bad guy. Why couldn't Magnifico himself make the bad decision to eat wishes out of a need to overpower his unknown threat? Why couldn't he be the one to make the bad choice so he'd suffer consequences for his actions? Because Fawn Vera Sunthorn's 7-year-old cried about it?
Were your films principally designed for children?
Well, no, you have to appeal to the adult, or, the adults have the money, the children don't have any money.
Because what you've done now is you have taken a character with a traumatic background who is misguided in his attempts to protect people, and you have made him so scared of a threat and desperate not to be overpowered again that he turns to something forbidden for help. You've taken your main villain and done absolutely everything within your power to victimize him. But at the same time, made his bad choice of using the book happen in such a clunky way that doesn't feel like a payoff. He was reluctant and decided not to use the book because it was clear he understood the gravity of it, and then suddenly, whoops, villain song, time to use the evil book while cackling like a hyena before we become obsessed with power. And yet, with every choice you've made to contextualize Magnifico's decision and every story beat you've written, and with any other character would have us sympathize with them, and now that you've put him in a situation that he unambiguously needs to be rescued from, you are going to ask your audience to cheer when he's defeated. And not only defeated, but given a truly horrible fate inflicted upon him by the one person who has been by his side the longest. And this is why Magnifico being the best character in Wish makes the movie worse. With our choices of character in this movie being Disney reference, unfunny DreamWorks face, non-verbal Funko Pop, and our main character being a transparently obvious stock personality with nothing to distinguish her from the other Disney lead girls in the past 10 years, Magnifico is the only character who has any kind of humanity to him. He doesn't feel like something constructed only to sell products, but feels like a real character, which makes him the only engaging person to follow in this story. This means the only character the audience can latch onto is the villain, which might have been okay. Villains have been fan favorites in Disney movies before this, but because he's presented as mainly sympathetic in the first half of the film, before an instantaneous shift to full evil in the second half, it makes the audience frustrated. Because now the only character who had any kind of depth to him has been reduced to a surface level evil guy with all the interesting things about him deleted. But also, the protagonist characters aren't even going to engage with what made him interesting in the first place. They're just writing him off as a threat they need to defeat. To simplify it further, Magnifico is the only character we care about, only for the movie to make him less interesting before our supposed heroes condemn him without a second thought. And again, this is not because I think Magnifico is the good guy in this narrative. This isn't about judging his morality in comparison to the other characters. It's about an actually fleshed out character among a sea of cardboard cutouts. Magnifico's fate would still have been needlessly cruel even if Asha and the other characters were actually written as characters, but it would have been far less aggravating. As it stands, the audience's experience is just a growing frustration until the story ends with a big fuck you.
This is the best I get, baby.
So, how did we get here? Doing research for the section ended up being a lot more frustrating than I anticipated. And that's because whenever the filmmakers spoke about Magnifico, they would say completely contradictory things about what they wanted to do with him, sometimes in the same interview.
What was interesting was when we'd work with the story teams and people would talk about how modern audiences, even if they want a powerful villain, they want to understand why he makes his choices. It's not enough that he's bad. That in and of itself only takes you so far. There have long been bubbling calls for the big bad to return, though Lee explains that this attitude from audiences wasn't strictly on her mind while she wrote the movie. We always say we can't get prescriptive from outside in, because we can't build character that way, said Lee.
It was a wish of ours to do a villain that we hadn't done in a while. A villain that you know is the villain from very early on, he explains.
We want to make people feel conflicted about, do I hate him or do I love him? And that's the line that we are trying to walk beautifully the whole time. So Chris brought that sensibility of, I admire this person. He's a king, but wow, he's really bad.
That was our desire from the beginning, to create a villain.
We've been waiting.
That you would know was a villain early on, a character that you would love to hate, every time they walk on the screen.
One of the things that I always do is have your protagonist and your villain completely aligned at the beginning. So the minute the first knock happens of disagreement, you see how they start making different choices.
And since these filmmakers have changed their story in every interview to try and sell the movie, I don't know if this complete contradiction is because the filmmakers themselves didn't know what they wanted to do with Magnifico, so they just threw everything at the wall and didn't bother to see what stuck, or if the nightmarish production due to micromanagement by the business side of Disney led to Magnifico becoming confused and unclear, or if the filmmakers are just lying in interviews to make the movie, character, and the studio sound better than they actually are. Actually, it's probably that last one. I can't take the filmmakers at their word, but for the sake of everyone's sanity, let's focus on the most often repeated details. The word they most often use when describing Magnifico is narcissist. However, it seems this was something brought to the character.
When This Is the Thanks I Get came in, I said, oh good, we've got a narcissist. I can play with a narcissist, and oh good, he's funny.
Since I don't know how early in production this was, I can't say if this is fine because it happened during the development stage, or if it's a massive problem that they didn't know what one of the core personality traits of their villain is. I just don't know. I do know this was present in the songwriting stage, and it was only after the song This Is the Thanks I Get was written that the filmmakers started using narcissist as a description for him.
Like every narcissist. I was like, I've dated a few of those.
I can see how they would use This Is the Thanks I Get as indicative of narcissism, since it's a song that boils down to me, what about me? What about my suffering? What about my hardships? You're all out to get me and I'm the victim. If not for the fact that the context of the song within the movie backs up Magnifico's complaints, instead of illustrating how self-centered they are. A narcissist character should have you screaming at the screen, this is not about you.
You stupid motherfucker! Oh my god!
The only other narcissistic trait the movie shows before the book corrupts him is the fact that he's got a very high opinion of himself.
You're right. I am a handsome king.
He's concerned about the way he looks, supposedly, and has the letter M embroidered on his cloak, which you could use as tools to illustrate being self-centered and not having empathy for anyone outside of yourself and your problems, but they're not pushed enough in the movie to be seen as faults. American society worships and encourages self-aggrandizing in almost every other aspect, although granted, these days you have to wrap it in a smokescreen of being self-love or self-acceptance because it's more marketable. But in general, showing any levels of conceit is supposed to be answered with cries of, "Yas, queen!" It's not a mentality I have any interest in engaging myself because I find it superficial and reeking of poor self-esteem. But that is the reality of American pop culture. Not to mention, simply being preoccupied with how you look is not really indicative of narcissism on its own. If you want your villain to be a narcissist, you need to show him before he gets corrupted, displaying narcissism in a way where we, the audience, don't want to hype him up for doing the same thing most influencers and celebrities do, and that the audience have been conditioned to cheer for. In short, you didn't make him obnoxious enough.
And you take the side of traitors. Of this one. Worst of all, my own brother who's trying to do this to me!
But then how could they, when they also stated more than once that they wanted Magnifico to be charismatic, both towards the people of Rosas to justify why they would give their wishes to him, as well as the audience because they wanted us to be conflicted about how we feel about him. Conflicted is not the same thing as confused. You know you have a problem when Chris Pine, the actor portraying the character, has a completely different opinion on his inner workings than the writers and director in an interview well after the movie had been released. Also, I would just like to point out another contradiction where the filmmakers say that they did not want to write a character from the outside inwards by having the public expectation force them to write a classic Disney villain exactly as they used to be. And then a paragraph later, saying they didn't want to make him outright evil because the modern audiences want more from their villains and they had to write him to match that expectation. Please pick an opinion so I can form a response to it. But okay, sure. Let's go with the often repeated point that they wanted to write a character that we see gradually become a villain. In an interview, Jennifer Lee, who wrote the screenplay, had this to say about Magnifico's trajectory in the story.
What was interesting was when we'd work with the story teams and people would talk about how modern audiences, even if they want a powerful villain, they want to understand why he makes his choices. It's not enough that he's bad. That in and of itself only takes you so far.
I disagree that modern audiences won't accept a villain that is just evil. Really, the only thing that changes a villain being criticized as lacking depth and a villain that is widely loved despite just being evil is
presentation!
Give them a motive or something they're trying to achieve, and most audiences will be satisfied with why the villain doesn't have any explanation for why he's so evil. Most often, it's not about having something overly complex, it's about having a simple idea executed well.
I've heard you. And I wish to go on hurting you.
We don't ask why Scar is evil. We know what he wants and understand that even before he does anything, he is considered a problem by the other characters.
There's one in every family, sir. Two in mine, actually. And they always manage to ruin special occasions.
We don't need to sit in on Mufasa's family therapy session to find out why Scar is like this to accept that he is. Leave that kind of thing to children's books, fanfics, and Disney's desperate franchise milking. For the purposes of the movie, all we need is to understand Scar's motivation. He wants to become king. It's completely lacking in depth or nuance, and I've never heard anyone complain that Scar is a bad villain because he's just evil. It works for the narrative, and we are satisfied enough by the performance and presentation that the story does not feel starved. That doesn't mean you can't have complexity in your villain, of course. The reason we praise more complex characters is because it is much more laborious to do complexity and layered writing. It gives us much more as an audience member to mentally chew on, which makes it feel rewarding and enlightening to engage with on a deeper level than just passively watching. However, there are two major reasons why I think it was the wrong thing to attempt for the specific movie that is Disney's Witch. The first is that if you wanted Magnifico to be a complex villain, he needed to be supported by a complex cast and a complex narrative. Neither of these are present in Wish as the film exists. The story is about the good Disney hero saving wishes from the evil king. The filmmakers kept saying in the making of that they wanted to make a fairy tale classic story without basing it on anything pre-existing. I was going to talk about how fairy tales as they exist in the modern consciousness do not lend themselves well to complexity and nuance if you're trying to write a brand new one, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized, no, that's not true. You can absolutely write a brand new fairy tale and have it be nuanced and complex. You just need to be, good at it.
How dare you? How dare you come to me now when I am this?
The problem with Magnifico is you wanted a complex character but didn't write a complex role for him to fill. You fully admitted that you had to rein Magnifico in while writing because he was running the risk of becoming the protagonist.
It's always hard with a character like Magnifico to know when to stop, because he could become the protagonist in some weird way.
If you wanted a straightforward Disney movie that is supposed to embody 100 years of animated film and pay homage to the story beats and patterns of your past movies, then this was not the place to try and write a complex and nuanced character, because that is completely at odds with what your intended target with this film was, which by the very intention of being an embodiment of all Disney Studios' past works, has to have its characters fall within very defined boxes. The second reason why this was the wrong movie to have this character arc is you have completely missed the inevitable direction that writing a fall from grace character will take the story in. There is no way you can write a story about a character becoming a bad person without it being a tragedy. That doesn't mean your movie has to have a sad ending or anything, but there is no escaping the bitter reality you will have to present to your audience that a character who started out good-hearted and who they wanted to succeed warped into something worse than they were before. It's sad to watch a good person regress into something bad. Even if they are defeated at the end, we may celebrate the hero's victory, but there will still be the bittersweet aftertaste of having to see the antagonist fail. I'm not saying this is a story that's too depressing or dark or extreme for animation, by the way. Almost everyone in Arcane is just a slow boil of characters becoming worse people, either unintentionally or deliberately. Jace and Victor are the best examples of this. But if you want to say, well, Arcane was animation aimed at adults, I can instead point to the Prince of Egypt. When it came out, the Prince of Egypt's marketing treated it with a little bit more reverence than The Road to El Dorado, but nothing about it painted it as being a piece of adult animation. Unlike Arcane, which is completely unambiguous in being for adults, or at best, 16 and up. And yet, for being a family picture with an age restriction rating somewhere between 7+ or PG, the central story of the Prince of Egypt, apart from all the biblical stuff, which is more the plot of the film, is the slow deterioration of the relationship between Moses and his brother Ramesses.
Why can't things be the way they were before?
As much as the Prince of Egypt is about Moses slowly getting disillusioned with his life and the way the Hebraic population of Egypt are treated, there is also the story of Ramesses slowly and systematically getting warped from a young man who cares about his brother into a cruel and unwavering despot. It's not from nothing that Ramses makes this change either. His father berates him for any minor show of imperfection, instilling in him the neurotic responsibility of carrying not only the kingdom of Egypt on his back, but the thousands of years of his direct bloodline as well. Not only is any shortcoming a failure as a leader, it's a failure of an entire dynasty. There may only be one scene in which we see... Who is his father? Hold on. Seti the First. Oh, they have their history accurate there. There may be only one scene where we directly see Seti berate Ramses, but it is all the context surrounding this that informs Ramses' regression. We see him vent his frustration to Moses. We see his elation when his father grants him more responsibility. And there is this fantastic moment after the time skip. We see Moses and Ramses speak in the throne room, and you see the statue of Seti looming over them in the background, with Ramses' own erected statue, purposefully built to be bigger than Seti, standing over it. A visual representation of Ramses' insecurities in living up to the impossible standards his father demanded of him.
Do you still not understand what Seti was?
He was a great leader.
Watching The Prince of Egypt, we follow Moses in his journey and arc, but Ramses' arc runs in direct parallel as we see him dig deeper and deeper into being a bad person as he makes his change into not just antagonist, but villain. And the reason it hits so hard is because Ramses mattered to Moses. Regardless of all the ordinations by God and the pressures of the conflict, we see Moses and Ramses more than once struggle and fail to come to an understanding, mostly due to Ramses' pride built from his past, not unlike Magnifico. And when Ramses is finally broken down, losing his son, relenting to Moses, and the good guy finally beats the bad guy, the first thing we see is Moses break down into tears. So yes, you can do a tragedy about a good person slowly becoming bad in a mainstream animated movie. But you have to be aware of what you are writing when you make the decision to write a fall from grace. It is a tragedy. Nobody may die, nobody may betray anyone, but the tragedy lies in the villain themselves as we watch them slowly warp and crumble. The only real way to avoid the tragedy is if the character that becomes the villain had no presence or importance before their regression, or if it's presented as a twist where their good guy persona was a fake mask that they'd been wearing until now. Well, I say the only way. There's probably a secret third thing, but for the purposes of a mainstream Disney movie which doesn't want to steer too far from pre-designated story beats because it's trying to pay homage to 100 years of Disney, you've got limited options on which direction to go. The filmmakers didn't want to do a twist villain again, but they didn't really know how to do anything else. So they tried to find a way to write a twist villain without the twist part, and this was their solution. My friend who works as a film extra in Hollywood has a far less charitable explanation, as in their opinion, Disney just refuses to write a character that's unlikable, i.e. unmarketable. The truth is probably somewhere in between, or both things at once. The filmmakers working on this movie were a mix of people in charge of projects like Frozen, Frozen 2, Ralph Breaks the Internet, and A Wrinkle in Time. As well as Disney alumni who have been there for over 30 years, back when Disney were putting out genuine quality more times than they weren't. One of this movie's directors directed Tarzan. The other was head of story on Raya the Last Dragon.
Look how close my butt is to my head! It's gonna make digestion so much faster.
Disney is less a studio making stories as it is a machine assembling parts in a way that can be sold most smoothly, which is a large reason so many of the true greats of Disney, Glenn Keane, Chris Sanders, James Baxter, Aaron Blaise, Armand Serrano, they all left. Say what you want about DreamWorks, DreamWorks has always felt, at the very least, more open to taking risks on creative ideas. This is why when DreamWorks is bad, it's really bad. But also why when DreamWorks is good, it reaches level of artistic storytelling Disney hasn't been able to do successfully since Zootopia, which was already a bright spark in a sea of mediocrity, rather than a consistent output of quality like they had in the 90s to early 2000s. And this is the final outcome. A film so shallow and lacking in anything that feels like it was made by a human being that it was accused of AI, an art style which was so focused on selling its own technology that nobody gave any thought of how it actually looked, leading the audience to say the trailer's animation looks unfinished, songs that were written divorced from any plot and retooled because their original meaning had been removed by rewrites, studio interference, and market testing, a main character with no individuality for fear of coming across as an imperfect product, and a character with deeper consideration given to him only because the writers were forced to write something other than a twist villain, leaving them floundering and forced to actually think about what they're writing in this area while following the motions everywhere else, leaving the audience confused, disappointed, and dissatisfied. If Magnifico was written as badly as the other characters, this movie would have been boring. As the only character with effort put into him, with nothing to support him from the plot or the lead, and designated to the role of evil bad guy, the movie is instead frustrating and a complete drain of your energy to sit and watch until you get to the kick in the teeth of an ending. Magnifico did not deserve better than this movie. But we, the audience, sure as hell did.
All this talk about my making a lot of money is bunk. After 10 years of pretty tough sledding, I am now making a moderate profit on my products. But every dime I take in is immediately put back into the business. I'm building for the future, and my goal isn't millions. It's better pictures. I'm not interested in money, except for what I can do with it to advance my work. The idea of piling up a fortune for the sake of wealth seems silly to me. Work is the real adventure in life. Money is merely a means to make more work possible.
Special thanks to Roland Marty, Zindrion, Catharsis939, and me and Mike Astor. And thank you as always for supporting my content.
I was going to say, since you both just mentioned that, I feel like we all had the animated character crush.
Absolutely, and if you don't cop to it, there's something wrong.
Who's yours?
You know what, I would go Jessica Rabbit.
Oh.
Roger Rabbit.
Fair.
You go straight X-rated, I got you.
That's not bad. Hey, the wink wasn't really necessary.
No, I